Our Mid-Autumn Festival is coming up. I'm not going to speak about the moon or Mid-Autumn today, but when I did a quick look at what it's about to remind myself, I discovered that the Mid-Autumn Festival, which will be this week, is at least 3,000 years old, that this festival, this celebration, goes back to an ancient time in China. And without planning it, the message I want to share with you is also the foundation of a Jewish festival that is at least 2,500 years old. It's called the Purim Festival, and it's still celebrated today. Purim. And it's based on the Esther story. Okay? So we're going to take a peek at this Jewish heritage and history. And as we look at it, I want to invite the men to make an adjustment because the story is the story of a young woman. Okay? Most of the time we've got stories of old men and the women have to adjust to it, okay, in the Bible. But today, we have the story of a young woman. And men, just make a mental shift this morning because this message is for you too. It certainly was for this old man here, okay? And we go back to a time in the Persian dynasty. This story is 10 chapters long in the Bible. We're only able to do the early part, the first 4 chapters. And when we look at this, I won't be able to tell the whole story, but I want to focus on the person of Esther. Well, really, I should not be just focusing on the person. Focusing on the person of Esther should also point us to the true personality behind the scenes, who is God. But the interesting thing is, God is never mentioned in the book of Esther. And when the Jewish translators translated the book of Esther into Greek from Hebrew, they felt something was missing, so they put God in about 50 times just to make sure you get the point, okay? But to me, that's lacking in subtlety a little bit, okay? But you will see the hand of God in this story, and it will be unmistakable. So I think I can move on from here, and if you can keep your hand on, keep your finger on the text. Okay. So just a big picture first of these chapters. We won't be able to do every part of it, but basically we have in these 4 chapters the beginnings of a very interesting story. It doesn't begin with Esther. It begins with another woman, a queen by the name of Vashti, or Vashti. And then Esther is introduced in the 2nd chapter, the part that we read just now. And then you have a 3rd character introduced, the antagonist, Haman. Okay? And 4 is when the crisis reaches a climax, and we have a girl not ready for that crisis. So let's see what we can learn here. First, Vashti's predicament. The king was Xerxes, and the queen at that time was Vashti. And of course, in those days, kings will have a queen and maybe concubines. And so for him to keep order, he'll put all of them into a place called a harem, including the queen, and they will have guards or guardians who were eunuchs, okay, to take care of these women. And if you read the first chapter, you know right away this is a world ruled by men. Men were the ones in absolute power. Okay? And in this court in particular, they had even more power because it was a kingdom at its height of wealth and prosperity. The way the celebrations are described, the utensils that are used over there, gives you that impression right away. This is not just the king, Xerxes. At that time he was called the King of Kings because his empire extended from North India into Ethiopia. Can you believe that? Okay, it sounds almost as big as Russia today. And in that big, powerful empire, there was the king, and there was a queen who said no to him. So that is the opening problem here. It's about, chapter 1 is about the sad fate of Queen Vashti, and it gives us a window into the world of women in Persian society. Even the queen did not stand a chance against the men in the court. And this is the world that Esther is going to enter. And you wonder, God is going to use a person to be his instrument to save his chosen people, Jews in 127 provinces. God's going to do that. And the person he chose was a powerless orphan girl who did not have many choices in life. Fascinating, isn't it? You know, around this time last year, there was an item of world news that made the headlines. Do you remember what it was? It was a news coming to us from Iran. What is the old name of Iran? Persia. Okay. What was the news? This was the news. September 2022, a 22-year-old Iranian woman by the name of Mahsa Amina died in Tehran under very suspicious circumstances. She was arrested by the morality police, and they said she had a heart attack and died. But when they did an investigation, they realized she had been severely beaten and probably had a brain hemorrhage. But the result of it was large-scale protests across the country. And within 2 weeks of her death, the protests had spread across 14 provinces in Iran and resulted in more than 80 people killed or shot in the protests. Continued for months, and Amini's death seemed to have touched a chord in many Iranians and emboldened them to stand up to be counted. A year later, this month, that movement for freedom from oppression is still present, especially in the young people, among the young people of Iran. I think Mahsa Amini's death will remain a seminal moment in the push for freedom in Iran. It will become a factor in Iranian politics. So just one young woman who didn't plan to be martyred, but was, created this movement of change. Iran today, go back 2,500 years, and you have a young woman, probably not much older, maybe even younger than Masa Amina, who is powerless and oppressed, but became the instrument of change. Hadassah, the orphan, becomes Esther, the queen. Dennis has already told you what the name Hadassah means, myrtle. And, uh, and the myrtle tree, the flowers of the myrtle tree, they're small, white and pale yellow flowers, but they have a very strong scent. And that's why myrtle flowers, blooms, are used to make perfume. And so Hadassah is that small, pale flower with a strong scent. Okay. That's a nice name, okay, for our equivalent of a chili padi. No, not quite. Okay, okay, small but very, very strong voice. Okay. Esther was not one with a strong voice. In the end, it was her action that was the strong scent in her life. But she was the small white flower when you first look at her. The name Esther means star. That is her Persian name. And star, in many ways, is also a good description of her because she became a celebrity in a way. She became the much-loved queen. But more than that, she became Israel's sole shining star in a sea of hopelessness. What special qualities did Esther have? What made her the right choice for God to use? Actually, if you read chapter 2, it doesn't say, well, Esther was highly intelligent and enterprising. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say Esther was very religious, well brought up, knew her Old Testament, brought up in the finest religious tradition. It doesn't say that. These things are not mentioned at this point in the story. What came out instead surprises us. We are simply told Esther was very beautiful. Esther was very beautiful. And verse 7 will add that she was beautiful and she was intelligent. No. Verse 7 says she was beautiful and she had a lovely figure. Okay. That's what qualified her. She was amiable. She had a personality that won people over. So when the chief eunuch, Haggai, took her in, she became his favorite because she had this personality that endeared her to people. And she was very teachable. When Mordecai says, don't tell them your name is Hadassah, she's okay. When Haggai says, when you go to see a king, you do this, A, B, C, D, and she said, okay. She knew how to follow instructions. But in what comes out in chapter 2, and what qualified her to fulfill her calling at this time was she was very beautiful and had a lovely figure. And the king fell for her beauty, and a beauty that was enhanced by a full year of beauty treatments, we are told. Okay. Now, at this time, you might not have a very high opinion of the king. He doesn't come across as a deep and profound guy, right? He seems more like an ordinary dude who let his hormones make his decisions for him, you know. His advisors come to him and say, hey, you let your wife, do this to you? And he says, yeah. He says, oh, you should punish her. Oh, yeah, okay. Now you should go around and find the best wife you can find in the whole empire. And he says, yeah, okay. That's all you get about the king. And at this point, he's not especially a profound guy. But Esther is prepared by God for this time, and God made her beautiful. And she sent to a spa every day for 12 months. Okay, I think that's why the prayer item came out for spiritual spa treatments, right? She sent, and every day she had aromatherapy, hydrotherapy, massages, mud baths. She had a pick of perfumes and fragrances. And every day she had specially prepared high quality food that was good to eat but not fattening, so she would fulfill her special calling. So tell me, is life fair? I had to go to seminary for 7 years and then plus 7 more, and then to join the easy life of pastoring. That's my calling. Is life fair? Esther, beautiful. Go for spa treatment. That's how you prepare for your calling. Well, each of us has a different calling. Each of us are prepared in a different way. Each of us has different qualities to prepare us for the task. And for Esther, it was to be beautiful. Now, this is not very popular to say, that being beautiful can be a calling. But if you look at Esther's case, it wasn't the other things that suited her to be chosen for the task. It was that she was beautiful. We have a student who's graduated already from BTS, and she dreamed to become a beauty queen when she was young. And at a certain time in her life, she prayed to the Lord. She said, Lord, I'm going to join a beauty pageant, and if I win, you will have the rest of my life. She won. She was, in fact, Miss Singapore in that pageant. And she had these possibilities of deals and contracts and tours before her. But when she won, the day after, she said to her mother, I'm ready now. She went into the ministry, joined BTS as a student. She's graduated, and she's in the ministry. So God gave her the qualities to be beautiful, to be attractive. But she knew that her beauty was not the whole story of her life. Each of us has a different calling. And for some of you, whether male or female, God has made you attractive and beautiful, and people notice you. What do I say to that? Wear a veil? No. We celebrate that beauty. People looking at you might take a second look. And what else will they notice after they have noticed how beautiful you are? Is there more that is worth saying after they admire how beautiful you are? You don't need to hide the beauty. God has a good use for that. But what's God doing in your life when He made you beautiful? So our story so far, we have a king who dethrones and ditches his queen because she made him look bad, Queen Vashti. And the king's sycophants, they stroke his pride and they hunt for the most beautiful woman. And Hadassah comes in, makes it to the first round, the second round. And then in a whirlwind without romance, she finds a crown on her head. The king proclaims a holiday. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Miss Persia, who is really Miss Israel. Okay? Because that part they did not know yet. Okay? So the queen is in place. All is well with the world. This orphan has made it to the throne. But to what power and authority? There is more glamour than truth in the public show. All she has made it to was the best room and service in the king's harem. story of Vashti already prepares us for it. Okay? She has made it apparently to the throne as queen, but really there was not much power behind that. And the reason for that is because God was not finished yet. And Esther is not the only person God would be using in his redemption story. She would be one of the threads that God would bring into place, but he has other threads that he would pull and weave together into his deliverance plan for the Jewish nation. So when chapter 2 comes to a close, we have these questions that nag us. Why did she have to hide her identity as a Jewish person? What is the story here? And this question begins to be answered in chapter 3. Chapter 3 takes us from Queen Esther to a man by the name of Haman. Let me see if I can get this slide changed. Okay. The rise of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And now the story begins to take shape. And the description of Haman here reveals to us the smallness of men's hearts. Haman wanted and had the power to destroy the entire race of people. And what motivated him to do that? It was simply hurt pride. His pride was hurt. His pride was hurt not by many people, but by one man, Mordecai. This is wickedness. Our lives are just terribly fragile. And out there are men with just hurt pride who can destroy us. Wicked people can do so much damage in a world where the wrong is off so strong. So don't be impressed with the great abilities of people who create empires, or who rule armies, or who have authority over people's lives. In the heart of men and women, there is still evil, pettiness. Such a person can take all the mudslinging of competitors, but stay up all night mulling over a single comment of a neighbor and plotting bitter vengeance. This was Haman. He had a smallness, and when we encounter this, we get into trouble with them and really need God's help. Haman hated the Jews, and not only did he want to destroy Mordecai, he wanted the entire race annihilated. And this is not the first time that God's people, Israel, would face annihilation. We saw that in Pharaoh in Egypt. Now we see this here. More recently, we saw it in Germany during the time of the Third Reich under Hitler. Time and again, there will be this drive, this movement, this anti-Semitic movement to damage and destroy the Jewish people. And if we call ourselves the new Israel, you can count on us being targeted too. Might not feel that today, but the Bible is clear about future persecution and suffering. When that time comes, we will want to read this book again. So the king listens to Haman, lets him carry out his scheme of hatred. And Esther, the queen, secretly a Jewish girl, is on the throne. The king doesn't know that when he allows Haman to do this, he was going to put his own queen in trouble. But as I said earlier on, he's not the most profound guy. Okay. So we are curious about what will happen next. And then if you think about it, don't worry. Even before the problem came out, God had begun the solution. Long before Haman's, things that Haman wants to do began to happen, God had already sent a young woman into the court of the king. So it's God. God had placed a Trojan horse there. You know, when Pharaoh wanted to destroy the Jewish people, and he wanted to kill all the little babies, the male child, and God knew what he was doing. What did he do? He had a little Trojan horse, a little baby in a floating basket, going right into the household of Pharaoh. Okay? So it is not Esther's power, it is God's power that is at work in this story. And we can marvel at the hand of God. And as this chapter closes, we have these words in chapter 3. The courtiers went out, spurred on by the king's command. The king said, "Yes, you can destroy the Jews." And the edict was issued in the citadel of Susa. The king and Haman sat down to drink. Okay, let's celebrate. Okay, let's drink. The city of Susa was bewildered. Susala. Okay. They were bewildered. They were so, they didn't know what was happening. King was going to annihilate the Jewish people across all the provinces. And this is the cliffhanger, okay? Yeah, for a while I thought of finishing the story here, but that's too much. Cliffhanger. Chapter 4 is where the crisis comes to a head. We can get to chapter 4. Okay. The girl who was not ready for such a time as this. Who was Esther? This was a young woman who lived in a world ruled by and regulated by men. These men went about it in the typical man's way. There's a problem at home. If a wife, offends her husband, you make a law for the whole nation. Okay, that's how the men do it. Okay, it's a world where male power is very evident. Force is used to keep women in their place. So how does a young, non-native orphan girl survive in a world like that? Well, Esther knew how to survive. She knew that if you want to survive being who you are, you work with the rules. You don't fight it, you live with it, you try and make a life for yourself. If men have the power and they impose a restricted role on women, then assume that role, And Esther had been good with following it, taking instructions, but now she is asked to stand out from the shadows. Now she has to somehow influence a decision that must be made in the world of men. You can understand how much of a burden she must be carrying at this time, how stressful it must be for her. Maybe she pondered the option of forsaking her people. Maybe she can cover up her Jewish ancestry, cut herself off from the past. After all, nobody except Mordecai knew, right? She stood some chance of success. She was the king's favorite. And what does she owe to her own people? She might be thinking. She's an orphan. She might have felt that she owed nothing to her people, owed nothing to the world. She will just survive on her own, and she can. Maybe that's what she could have thought, right? Esther has been asked to do something no one else could do, and it was hers and hers alone to do. So it must have felt as if the whole world was on her shoulders. We can feel for this girl. Does God place on our lap something that will be too hard for us to do? Does He place a responsibility on your shoulders that appears too heavy to bear? It seems sometimes He does. He places it in before us. He might not be asking us to do it all in our own resources, but somehow we are called to say yes to a burden that we cannot bear. And when God does that, He promises to provide a way to do it. But He needs us to say yes. Have you ever been in a position where you had to do something no one else can do for you? And deep down you know you don't have the ability to do it. Maybe you feel you don't even have the character or the personality to do it, but so much depends on it. Husbands who feel they need to carry the responsibility of the whole family. Men and women who need to make a living while taking care of aging parents. Mothers who struggle with work pressure and sometimes the feelings of guilt that they need to give more time to their children. Things that no one else can do for you. One of the things about going to school and taking exams is that exams are a practice for life because no one can take the exam for you. No one can take that test. So Psalm 23 is very good for exams. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, no one is with me, but thou art with me, okay? There are some things in life that even friends cannot go with you. Your best friends cannot go with you too. Job knew that. Job knew that. Okay? When that happens, when you are struggling, say God gave you a burden, but you're coping with debt, with addiction, with emotional baggage from the past. You're paralyzed by inertia. You haven't been able to move on with a great career. God places a work on your shoulders. Maybe you didn't ask for it. You have no idea how you will face these mountains and giants. What will you do? What did Esther do? And here we discover a very admirable quality in Esther. This is very instructive for us when we face insurmountable problems. She chose not to forsake her people. She knew she was a Jew, and that gave her the courage to do what she was going to do. In this crisis, Esther begins to understand who she was. Maybe being Jewish wasn't big on her personal agenda up till this point, because if she chose her identity, she might have to pay the price with her life. But she did. She was prepared to throw her lot in with her people, condemned by royal decree, rather than continue to prosper as a non-Jew. And so, God used her. Now, Esther knew what she had to do, but she felt like the loneliest person in the whole world. And so she said to Mordecai, I will fast. I will fast for 3 days and 3 nights without food and water to prepare, to find favor with the king, and he will give me permission to speak. But, she added, I will need all of you to fast with me as well. Here we are learning something about the two aspects of fasting. Fasting prepares a person for a time of dilemma and crisis. Fasting helps us to get to that place of great, not power, great need for God. In our hunger and helplessness, we cry out to God, and we are weaker than we normally are. We say, God, if you don't come in and do this, it's not going to happen. We place ourselves at God's mercy. And Esther placed herself at God's mercy. But she also said, I want the others to fast for me. And feeling like the loneliest person in the world, she needed to know she was not alone in doing what she needed to do. No one else except her can step into the court of the king, this corridor of power. But everyone else can vicariously bear the burden with her. So to fast for someone is to identify with his or her situation. Fasting need not be made into something extremely religious, right? It doesn't have to be something very holy or spiritual. It's a way of saying, I can't really experience the pain you are experiencing now, but when I fast for you, I'm expressing my willingness to be there for you, my willingness to share that burden with you, whether I can or not. But I will fast with you while you go through this time of trial. And that's what Esther did. Now we pause the story here to ponder over what has transpired. And you can look at some points, and I want to share with you a few points of application that has been good for me. Put it down on screen now. God shaped you to fulfill a destiny that will display His glory. God shaped you. And that means that when you look into the mirror, you need to begin to love who you are. Because God shaped you to do something. And what you see in that mirror is exactly the right mix, exactly the right shape to do that assignment that God has, that purpose that God has. And that purpose will fulfill not your glory, not your ambitions, God's glory. God will be glorified in what He will do to you. For many of us, we look into the mirror and it will not look like Esther. But love that, because that's exactly what God has made you. Of course, you can make some minor improvements from exercise and dieting. Okay, all that fine. Okay, but that's who God has made you, and He's made it good, perfectly suited for what He wants to do to glorify Himself. I put the macho guy over there because I think it's this application is for men too. Okay. I'm sorry, I need to pull back the slides a bit. Pull back a bit. One more, please. Yeah, thank you. Number 2, your calling is worthy even when you do not feel that you are. Sorry for the typo there. Your calling is worthy even when you do not feel that you are. Don't mix your calling up with who you are, because your calling will be great, will be wonderful, will be too big for you. Okay? And who you are, we're filled with self-doubt most of the time. We don't think we can do it. But sometimes we measure our calling by who we are. No, God gave you a calling. And that calling, some people say, is God-sized, not our size. And when He gives it to you, we do say, woe to me, I am a sinner. Isn't that what Elijah said? Isaiah said? Yeah, he recognized that. But did he say yes? He did. Esther knew she was not up to it, and so she needed help. But she said yes. Her courage is not the courage of power, it's the courage of obedience. So you have a calling that is worthy. Do you know what it is that God is calling you to do that's bigger than what you can do? Number 3, you belong. Find your place among God's people. Now, this we say to members who have been here 20 years, and to members who have been here 2 months. When you come to this community, you might not feel you belong. The Word of God says you belong. And when you belong, your faith will be tested to say, yes, I belong. And if I'm not sure about that, I might face a test that will invite me to say, yes, I belong. These are my people. And I will invest and sacrifice and pay the price to say I am part of this community. Esther had to say that to once again to realize she was a Jewish woman. She was Hadassah. Esther needed that. Maybe we do too. And you have to understand, you belong. Whether you feel that way sometimes or not. You're part of this community that will be tested and whose faith will be shown to be pure gold. So align your life purpose with God's ambition for His people. Whatever gifts God has given you, it could be the gift of beauty, attractiveness. It could be a charming personality. It could be being great at administration and management. I really admire people who are good with that. You might be good with numbers. There's a whole diversity of gifts in the body of Christ. Okay? But the gifts is not the giver. Align your life with God's purpose, whatever the gifts are. Okay? God didn't give people some gifts just so that they could be rich and successful, and the rest of us who are good with prayer, we will be spiritual. Okay? It's not like that. God gave all gifts for His glory, and all the gifts must be aligned to His purpose. Even the gift to make money. Okay? Maybe I should say especially the gift to make money. All our gifts, whether they seem spiritual or secular, has been given to us for us to align with God's ambition. And God will change that ambition from time to time as we grow. When I was younger, I thought God's ambition was just church. And my whole spiritual life for a long time revolved around church, church, church. Okay? That's God's ambition. And later on, I discovered there are other words that describe God's ambition. Mission of God, God's ambition. The kingdom of God, God's ambition. And yes, still, church, church, church. We align ourselves and don't worry so much about our own ambitions. Our own ambitions are nothing compared to God's ambition, because our own ambitions will come to a close. God's ambition is for that eternal picture that we sang about during the worship, the picture of the glorified church in heaven. So let's begin to think how that will happen with me. Esther played to God's tune, and when the symphony came alive, we are all like the small guy at the back of the orchestra who plays the cymbal. You know, the guy who plays the cymbal in the orchestra, he might, or the triangle, he might have just that once or twice. Okay? And at that precise moment when the symphony approaches the climax, he raises his cymbals. He says to himself, I'm in this orchestra for such a time as this. Clash, okay? And we are in God's orchestra for such a time as this. Doesn't matter if you are not the main figure in the whole picture. You need not be the Moses or the Elijah. You just need to align yourself and be part of God's story. When you are, that story will endure. And I pray that your story will endure because it is part of God's story. Let's pray together. Lord, thank you for this morning. We ask for you to open our eyes to what you see. God, when you look at us, what do you see? When you look at me, what do you see? I want to see myself in that way also. Lord, I pray that you cure my unbelief. Help me to believe in you, trust in you, and to place all that I am and all my gifts at your throne of grace so that your plans will come to fruition. Your glory will be what shines. Pray all this in Jesus' name.